So this is kind of like a common question that I get where we'll build some type of animation and I'll show you guys how to build it. And then I'm like, oh, this looks amazing. I never really dived into how to reuse that. And that's because there's a couple of different ways. Let's talk about how to do it. You have two different primary ways of doing it and then a couple of different ways within those primary ways. So you can either have it already rendered out. So let's say there's a very specific animation, maybe like this one, where, you know, I'm always going to use that. There's nothing really that I need to change with it. So I could just render that out as a video file. And then all I have to do is just drop that on top of my video clip whenever I want to use it. So it's a small video file that, you know, I can just reuse whenever. The other way is if I'm creating something like this, and maybe it's a lower thirds or just some type of an animation that I will need to alter. And altering it, I can't render it out, so I need to be able to change it if it's the color to fit, you know, something or wording or whatever it may be. But I like how the animation is and I don't want to recreate that. So let's first dive into what I think most people are going to want to do is just render it out. Within rendering out, there's a couple of different ways that you can go about doing this. Let's dive into the first one. I have this animation here, and I just made very basic animations, but it just kind of opens up and I have my channel name, right? So let's say I just want to animate just this portion. So just this, I just want to animate this, or excuse me, not animate, render. I just want to render this. What I could do is the first way, and this is how you would do it in the standalone version, is you would get a saver node. So I just hit shift, and I held down shift and then I hit spacebar to get the search tool, and then you just type save and then you get the saver node. And the saver node works pretty much the same way as the standalone version. It just it's kind of limited, and I'm guessing because of the other options you have within DaVinci, they've kind of made it limiting. How it's set up currently is they want you to use EXRs, which is like a multi-pass all-in-one file. But how we would do this is we would just take wherever our animation is. So it's right here. So this particular node is obviously the video. And then all of this right here is the actual animation itself. And then it comes down to the merge. So we see both of them. So all we would do is we would just come out to here. And so we have the animation with the transparent background. And then in our saver node, there's a couple of settings in here, and there aren't a lot that are actually visible, but you would just come in and save this to whatever you want. Let me just drop this on my desktop in a folder, and this is going to save as an image sequence. So going to save it in here, and you can save it as an EXR. EXRs are quite large. If you don't need multiple passes or anything like that, we'll just go to all files, and I'll just type in PNG just so we have that alpha in the background. And I'm actually going to take the number off and then hit save. And the reason why I took the number off is because when the image sequence, they're all going to be numbered anyways. So once we have our saver node here, we're just going to come up to Fusion and then click render all savers. And now it'll go through the whole thing. It'll render it out. And this just says that it's 150 frames. So I'll go through, render that out, and then I'll have 150 frames. Okay, so that's pretty much done. And then all you would really do, let's come back to the edit page and let's just pull this in. Let me go grab that image sequence. So I'll just grab that folder with the image sequence. So I'll just drop it right in here, and then it's right here. And obviously this is an image sequence, so let me just show you. It's just a whole bunch of the images. So this is one way of doing it. This wouldn't work for a lot of people, just because if you lose one of them, you're losing a frame. But once you would bring it in, you just drop it in. It knows it's an image sequence, so then you could play it through, and that's playing off of this image sequence here. So that's one way of doing it. The other way would actually be creating a video file with an alpha channel. So let's dive into that. So like, let's say we're here and this is our animation that we had. So let's get rid of the saber for now. This is our animation. What we now need to do is push this to the edit page or to our timeline without that background, so that we actually have the alpha values. So to do that, we would be grabbing from the same point here and not grabbing this background that we currently have here. And we would just connect this over to our media out. So I'll just bring it up here so it makes more sense visually. And then we would just be taking this and pushing it to the media out, which will then go back to the edit page. And as you can see it here. And the reason why we don't see the checkering here is because this is showing what the video would actually represent. And where there's no values, it's going to be displayed as black because it can't be transparent. But yeah, so anyways, so this is quote unquote transparent. And to export this, we would just go over to the deliver page. And then once we're over in the deliver page, what we're going to do is we're going to go to individual files. And we're going to then look along here for whichever the one is that we're working with. So it's this one here. And all we have to do is right click and then go to render this clip. And all that's really doing is just setting the in and out points for that particular clip. We're going to come into here, obviously set our location, set our file name, and then this is where we actually need to pay some attention to. Let me drop this down. So we need to have a codec that also has the ability to include an alpha channel. A lot of codecs don't, so if you're on Windows or Mac, it's going to be a little bit different. If you're, well, I think Mac has them both, but if you're on Windows, what you're going to be doing is going to DNxHR, which has the ability for an alpha channel. If you come down here, you can see export alpha, so that's going to include that alpha channel. 444 is going to be a bit higher on the data rate, so it's going to be a larger end file. It's not really needed. If you're just doing something like this, you could honestly get away with standard quality, but you could just do high quality if you want. This is just going to reduce that overall size of that video file. So that's how I would do it on Windows. On Windows, you can also do Grassy Valley, but DNxHR is going to be like a more commonly used thing. On a Mac, you could do ProRes, but you need to go up to ProRes 4444 to be able to do the alpha channel. And that's also going to be a large file. So you might get a smaller file with DNxHR, but you know, your mileage may vary. So you can take a look at that. So let's jump into doing this quick. I'm just going to save this as Saber1. Find a location quick. I'll just throw it on my desktop just with the other one. And then we will add to render queue and render this out. So there we go, 3 seconds. Come back over to the edit page, and now let me grab that video clip, and we can drop that video clip in our master folder. So let's get rid of this. We'll take that Saber one here. Oh, I actually had the audio here, which I really didn't need, but I had it. And then now if we play this through, that's an actual video. So then you would just be able to drop that on any project. So if you had like something that calling out to your social media, Instagram, whatever it may be, you could render it out that way. And then you have the alpha background, so then you can move it around without having to worry about edges. Let me grab my button so I can show you what I mean by this. So I would just drop this here. Oh, there it is. Drop it here. And then this is my play button that I made. And you would just be able to then take this and move it around however you want. And you don't have to worry about the edge because it's just all transparent. So you just be able to move it around and kind of place it wherever you want for your animation. So that's how that works. Now let's go into if you want to change something in whatever you're making. So like, let's say we, instead of this being a static JRTV, maybe we want to make this into a lower thirds and, you know, the person's name, but we want the animation to be the same for the most part. So let's jump over here and we'll just make this the same way. And now what I'm going to do is I'm just going to highlight everything that creates my animation first. So this is everything that we've been exporting, like where it comes out. We're just going to copy or highlight everything that we want. And we're going to be making what is called a macro. So it's pretty much going to take all of these nodes, jam them into one node, and then make a file on your computer that you can then call at a later date, and you will give different parameters that are editable. So we'll highlight everything. We're going to right click, and then we're going to go into macros, and we're going to go to create macro. And then this window will pop up, and this is every possible setting that all of these nodes currently have. So it ends up becoming very like clustered. It's when you first get into this, you're like, what am I looking at? Each node's going to be a little bit different in the values that it has. So we could come into the background, and let's just grab this background and make it visible over here. So all of these settings have different parameters in here, and it takes a little while to get used to, but let's say, so currently this is the color page, right? So we have different settings. So the top one here is the solid. So if by clicking this, what this is going to do is it's going to make this drop down available, right? And then this is just going to be this drop down. Then the next one is color. That's just going to make this available. And then we have these different colors here. And this gets a little tricky at first. It doesn't make much sense, but the more and more you play with this, it'll make more sense. The reason why there's a top and a bottom is because when you get into the different gradients, there's two different colors that you would have to mix. So if let's say we set top and then we only did the top colors, right? So we only did the top colors here. What ends up happening is if we want to, like, let's say this one, and it calls one of the other ones, the only one that's going to be visible here is just that one color. And the reason why it's top left, top right, bottom is because when you come down to four corners, obviously there's going to be the four corners. Let me show you. Hello. Let's get rid of that. So it'd be the four corners. So that's how that would work. But that's not currently what I'm using. So we would do that. And then because we have in here, to make this visible, we have text. The other thing that we could do, so we have these checked. The other thing we could do is we can come into the text tool. So let's look at this text tool here. So here's the text tool, and we'll close image for now. So here's the text. So we have the styled text. So you could click that to get this box to change things. And the same way with the other ones. You just have all your different parameters. So then you would just save that. I already have one saved. So let's come over to here and let's turn this into a Fusion clip. So here we are. And then I'll come over into Fusion. And now once I'm in here, once you've saved it, you can right click, add tool, and come up to macro. And then here is that macro, so it's right here. And then you can just take this and you connect it up. And there it is. That's the whole animation. Now everything's locked in, so you can't change anything, okay? And then, but it makes it easy. So like, let's say you set something up and you're always using that. So like, look at the news, right? They always have pretty much the same thing as their like lower thirds. And let's say you're building stuff for your team and you just want them to just be able to come in and change something, you know. So then you would be able to just come in here and change something quick, and then you have all the rest of the animation is the same. Or you need that day you need to change the color scheme to something else, there you go, now you can change it, right? But the rest of it makes it quick, so you don't have to worry about keyframes or doing any of that kind of stuff. So that's how you do that. Now let's say you want to, instead of it doing it this way, you want to have all of the nodes. So let's say you're working on something and you like how something's built, but you always want to have that as your starting point where you're going to add more onto it. So let's come back over to the edit page, and I'm actually going to I'm actually going to go back over to the Fusion page, but I just want to be on this particular node or this clip here. So the other thing that you could do, and this is something that was pulled from the standalone version, is using the .comp files. And .comp files is pretty much like the save file for the standalone version. Going to the standalone version to DaVinci Resolve and using that same comp file, some of the stuff will work. There are some things that aren't compatible with one another. So if you're creating something in the standalone and you bring it into DaVinci Resolve 15, there might be some weird things that happen when it comes to like scaling or positioning. A couple of the nodes I noticed, but some of my projects work perfectly fine. Some don't. Some are kind of weird. But like I said, your mileage may vary, and I'm guessing the more and more that this becomes more and more mature, they're going to improve on this. One of the things that, and they're also backwards compatible as well, and there's still a couple of like little bugs. The only big thing that I would look out for is the media in node doesn't exist on the standalone version. Speaking about media in node, is if you have a media in node, so like let's say you add in a image here of like this, like I have the bell, right? So like let's say I would pull that bell in as a media in node. You could add it into your .comp file, but there's a bit of a caveat here, is because when it pulls it in and it's in here, it's going to have an absolute file path instead of a relative file path. That's the one downside. There is a way to get relative file paths, and it's the way that the standalone version does it, but a lot of people are going to be used to using the media in node, and that gives an absolute file path. And what I mean by that is, so if I was to take a project and make a .comp file and then bring it back in, it's always going to look for that one file path. So with, let's say, Windows, the file structure is in a way in which you have a area on Windows that is specifically for the whoever's logged into the computer. So like for me, it's Justin as a user, right? If there was a file on my desktop that I was using to build a node structure, every time it's going to go to, I think it's users/Justin/desktop or something in that manner. If I take it over to Bob's computer, Bob's desktop, if he puts that same file on his desktop, it's going to be users Bob desktop. So that's where you kind of run into issues, because you'll get errors that'll pop up saying like, I can't find that particular file. It's not hard to, bring it back in and reconnect, but the point of building these is to make things faster. And there is a workaround to this, but you have to understand why the media in node exists. And the reason why the media in node exists is because it works off of DaVinci Resolve's file system. And what I mean by that is, if you ever use optimized media, anything that's in the optimized media would have to be in the media library. And the media in node pulls data from the media library with ID, like media IDs, I think they're called. And so it works. I might be losing some people here, but that's how it works. The way in which it works in DaVinci Resolve is you get a path, and then in Fusion, how it works is you get a path, but then you can also set path maps. So that's kind of like a relative, because on a system, you can put the file anywhere in your system, and then you just have a relative location. And let me quickly show you what I mean by that. So if I was to go to the media pool and bring something in here, so let's say I bring this in, right? And once I bring it in, we have a media ID. Now this is calling back to our media pool. So in the media pool, if I ever, for any of the media in here, if I did like optimization, like almost like a proxy to make it run faster in DaVinci, it's always going to call that media ID, so it can pull that while you're working on it, and then when it goes to render, it sources its data from the actual file instead of that optimized media. So that's how that works. Now let's go into how it's done in the standalone version. You'd be actually using a loader, and let me just grab one node here. Sure. So this would be grabbing a location, right? But what you can do is you can get whatever your location is to be a relative location. So let me grab, let's bring in another one, and I believe I have a location here. So here and here. So like, let's say I pulled this picture, right? So I pulled this picture, and let's look at its location. Its location is C users Justin desktop ABC box. So I hit OK, I bring this in. Now when I bring this in, if we look here, we have a different path than what I just spoke about. This is ABC box, right? So the relative path is that whole Justin users desktop, right? And how we would actually do this, because now when this is in here, this, and I make this into a .conf file, just this is going to pass, not that C users, Justin, all that stuff. That's not going to pass. It's just going to be this information. So if I was to then take this comp file to someone else's computer, give them all the files, all they have to do is they would have to come into Fusion settings, go to path map, come down to the bottom, you make your own. You say, okay, we know that the call is ABC, so we just put in here ABC as the location, and then wherever we have that particular folder on our system. So now we have the ability to change things. Now, for one file, it's not that big of a deal. You could just drop it in and, you know, it's easy peasy. But if you're working on a project that has maybe multiple elements, so like the bell and, you know, a pointer finger and maybe an Instagram logo or whatever it is, right? It would be a pain in the butt if you have a bunch of loaders to change all of those locations. Instead of doing that, you could just have it right in here, then hit save. And then when you import that stuff, it's going to know exactly where to go look on your system relative of what's actually written here. So that's kind of how that would work. With proxies, you also have a location for proxies where the media in uses the optimized media, which is built into DaVinci Resolve, and how that works. So let's actually dive into how to make a .conf file. So pretty much we have our whole project set up here, right? How we want to export this. We would just come up to File, Export Comp File, right? And then you would just pick your location, you would save it. Then when you're ready to bring it in, it's the same thing. So you would just have, let's say it's, you know, a single file. So let's just bring this down here. I'll just turn this into Fusion quick and come over here. And now once we're in here, we could just come up to File, Import, and then this is my button. It's gonna bring it in. And then once you import it, everything's here, and you can go back to editing or adding whatever it is that you want to add in. There's one other thing you could do. If you didn't want your project filled up with a whole bunch of Fusion stuff, you could actually open up the other project. And let's say you have one project that has all of your assets for your lower thirds and all of that. You could just render those out and then bring them back into the project. And instead of having to close and open, what you could do is you could come down to here and right click on your project and just make sure you have dynamic project switching. And this will enable you to jump back and forth between projects, no problem. So you would just do that, click on another project that you want it to open. Once the project's open, you'll then have this little drop down up here with all of the different projects that you currently have open, and you could just jump to that project, change whatever your animation is. So let's say this is a project that I was working on, but here's my animation. Change the animation, go to the deliver page, render that out, then go jump back to the other project and work on that. If you have a network render system set up, you could just push that to the other render system, go back into your other project, work on it. When it's done, pull that other file in, and then start working on your actual edit. It really depends on your workflow and if you are okay with stuff being in Fusion or not being in Fusion. Those are all the different ways that you can save different assets that you're making within Fusion. Hopefully it wasn't too much, but let me know in the comments what you guys think about this one. And if you have any questions about DaVinci Resolve that weren't answered here or you're unable to find it on the web, there's a link down in the description to our Facebook group. You can join that, ask your question there. If someone in the community knows, they'll help you out. But with that being said, my name's JR, and thanks for watching.